大家好，欢迎大家来到国际培训大咖五十谈，我是顾立民。上一期呢，我们非常荣幸的请到了林恩科尼女士花了近2个小时的时间为我们讲解了、展示了，并且教授了视觉沟通艺术的这个技能特别是还教我怎么样去画画。我希望大家也能够通过这个边听也边自己在画，确实是要有人教过之后呢，通过不断的练习，能够掌握这方面非常非常好的这方面的技巧。那么大家可以从上次的访谈当中看到，视觉沟通艺术是对我们的工作是多么的重要，特别是在未来我们从事培训工作的小伙伴们，如果能够掌握这样的技巧，那么我们能够一图胜千言的话，那么我们的沟通效率将会多么的高效啊！而且呢，确实能够为我们的职业发展铺平很多很多道路。再次感谢林恩科尼女士 Lynn Kearney， 几十年来在这个领域里面不断的耕耘，不断的创新，并且呢，在绩效改进把它应用到绩效改进咨询的项目当中，并且呢，创造了很多的佳绩。希望呢，真心的希望以后有机会通过网络呢，能够跟 Lynn Kearney 进行学习。今天晚上我们又一次非常荣幸的请到了另外一位非常重量级的嘉宾，她的名字叫 Margo Murray， 马果穆雷女士。Margo 在绩效改进领域非常的知名，而且呢，她在国际上几十个国家都工作过。在她40年近50年的工作的生涯当中呢，职业生涯当中呢，她的最主要的实践和研究的领域呢是导师制 mentoring。而且呢，在 mentoring 领域里面呢，他是非常非常的知名的，而且他做过很多很多的项目。那么，到目前为止，我们已经进行了29期了。大家可以在这29期29位大咖的给我们讲解过程当中，无论是他们的经历，还是他们过去给我们做过的一些个案例，大家可以看出来，培训确实是一门科学授课确实是艺术那么确实呢，能够给很多的客户，给很多大型的企业或者其他的企业创造真实的价值。同时呢，从整体上来讲，也为美国经济的发展从70年代开始做出了很大很大的贡献。那么面对我们的未来，我们培训从业者能否复制他们当年为美国所做的贡献，而为我们国家的经济做出很大的贡献呢？这是值得我们思考的。好，今天晚上我们请到的 Margo 就是在导师制方面的专家，而且呢，他创立了一个新的导师制的方法。那么今天晚上呢，我们就围绕着导师制来向他学习，来向他请教，特别是导师制跟教练制有什么样的区别导师制与我们企业的学习发展体系之间是什么样的关系在实行导师制项目的时候需要注意哪些等等等等。好，我们闲话少叙，下面我们就隆重请出 Margo。 Hi Margo, how are you?
Hi George, I'm doing well, thank you. 谢谢.
Oh, that's Chinese. Wow. Wow. Well, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be on the Training Masters series. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Sure. And for our audience, would you please introduce yourself and tell us where you grew up, where you went to college, what did you study, and tell us where you live and work now.
Of course. It seems like in some ways I've made a circle because I was actually born in Missouri in the southern part on a farm. And except for 2 years that we spent in Wichita, Kansas during World War II, where my parents worked for Beech Aircraft, my mother was one of what is now called the Rosie the Riveters, the women who went to work making airplanes. And after VE Day and VJ Day, we returned to the farm briefly, and my father bought a grocery store and gas service station to put my brother into business, knowing that it would be difficult for this young man when he re-entered civilian life. So I graduated high school, what would be called secondary school, in Missouri, and left Missouri 4 days later as a young bride to go to California. And then a year later gave birth to my son, David. And when he was a year old, I realized I couldn't stay in an abusive marriage. So I went to work at McClellan Air Force Base in what today would be called an IT position. We called it data processing at that time. And then realized that I was not able to stay in a boring job. So I started college at night. There was a local community college that came on the base and conducted classes. So I was able to go to school at night and work full-time days and raise my son as a single parent. And that began 22 years of that kind of work and study to obtain 3 degrees, and lower division undergraduate in liberal arts, and then my bachelor's degree in business and management, and an MBA with an emphasis on advanced management theory. So after 8.5 years working for the Air Force, I finished my undergraduate work and was accepted into the all college honors program. So I took a year off work and went to school full time, and then was recruited by the telephone company into an accelerated promotion program that was available at that time only to men. So I had to work hard to obtain a job that had measurable results so that I could prove myself. And I began to develop the, I think, unique skills that have stood me in good stead with my consulting business, in that I had line management experience and the business experience that gave me the vocabulary of results-oriented business people. So after 11 years with 10 management jobs with the phone company, I started MMHA, my consulting firm, in 1974. So this year marks 46 years. And during that experience with the telephone company was when I was appointed to set up the first internal performance improvement group and learned about performance improvement, human performance technology, ISPI and ASTD at that time. And I joined both. And so was able to work with AT&T when they developed what is now called the largest industrial training effort and standards for training that has ever been done, even to this day. So I brought those standards into my own consulting practice, and now, of course, they're the foundation of what ISPI calls the standards and the principles for performance improvement. So that's kind of the ancient history. This year, of course, with COVID, it's caused me to rethink the corporation and consider what I'll do. I still enjoy the executive coaching that I do. I enjoy acting as an advisor for the ISPI BABS chapter, and I'm facilitating their strategic planning effort right now. And I'm acting as an advisor to a person who's setting up a mentoring club that matches millennials with experienced people worldwide. So there's some exciting work still that I can do, even remotely, as we're all working these days. So in a capsule, that's the ancient history. Do you have further questions about that? I tried to
Thank
give
you.
you the
Yes, I
high
do.
level view of it.
Right. You said you worked for a telephone company. What's the name of that telephone company? Is that a bell?
At that time, it was called the Pacific Telephone Company. It later became Pacific Bell and then
Okay.
merged with Southwestern Bell.
Right.
It came under an umbrella company called Telesis, and now it's back to Pacific Bell.
Yeah.
And
So quite a
in addition to my professional work, I'm now living on my son's vineyard property, growing wine grapes, and have brought in one very good harvest of Chambourson wine. So that is a very satisfying engagement for me, because it gets me out to be where I can be spiritual in nature and do something that
right.
shows results.
Great. Great. Is that are you brewing red wine or white wine?
It's all red. We have two varietals, St. Vincent and Chambourson,
Mm-hmm.
vinted very much like a Pinot Noir. So it's, and tasting very good after a year in the bottle.
Great, great. Because the reason I'm asking is because I used to also work for a telephone company too, called the US West. I started with US
Oh,
West. Well, that was later, and then Quest, and now it's called the CenturyLink. One of those RBOCs. The original Bell operating companies, RBOC, and so we had some common telecommunication background there, but in different times probably. And
yes, we do.
Margo, I know throughout your career you have been focusing on the field of mentoring. So when did you start? When did you get started in mentoring, and what's the occasion? And then we'll dig into what is mentoring.
Okay, actually, both with the Air Force and with the telephone company, I went through accelerated promotion programs. So I was selected to like fast track to higher level management. And each of those programs had some features that might be called mentoring, and that
Mm-hmm.
I was assigned to an advisor, a coach, who would help me both with formal education choices and with my career. But they didn't have everything. So I started really, while I worked for the telephone company, developing a model for facilitated mentoring that would be more systematic and also be systems positioned in an organization so that it interacted with the other types of learning and development strategies that were being used. So when I launched MHA in 1974, we began with 4 lines of business, and facilitated mentoring, design, and implementation was one. Strategic planning, with the model that I'd used with the phone company, was the second one. And then a performance improvement model that was patterned after the AT&T standards. And then when there was lulls and the peaks and valleys of consulting,
Mm-hmm.
as there always
Mm-hmm.
are, as you know, in your own business, during those down times of face-to-face work, I developed workbooks and wrote my book on mentoring, and one on time management, one on communications, that could be sold as off-the-shelf resources that supported the 3 services. So those 4 lines of business have continued, in addition to, like I said, the executive coaching, which is kind of a spin-off, or one segment, I should say, of a mentoring process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mentor, to me, at companies, I used to work for, I was in charge of the IBM China, Greater China's learning efforts. And we had mentoring program. I also worked for Ericsson, China Academy, and I was working for, US West and Quest. So the big company, they're all Fortune 500 companies. They all have coaching programs. They also have mentoring programs alongside the learning and development, systems, mechanisms. So, and coaching is very specific. I had a mentor too, and at IBM we had a mentoring system. That in that system that I have several, 3 or 4 mentors at that time, and I meet with them once every half year, to ask them some basic questions and to kind of review. It's a mechanism, because in my KPIs, I have to find my mentors. That's how IBM individual contributors, even at different levels, managers, especially at higher ranks, you have to find more senior executives to be your mentors, to bring up your capabilities. So is that the mentoring so in your definition, what is mentoring? And so tell us your definition, and what does it do?
Well, before I tell you my definition, I'll tell you one more connection that you and I have, and that is that my firm designed the IBM's mentoring process many years ago. And after we discontinued the formal engagement, they have changed it, obviously, but we trained in IBM at one time 195 coordination teams in 11 of their geographical areas. And the effort was driven by 3 things. They wanted to cross-skill people so that when there was an opportunity for IBM to get a contract somewhere in the world, they could put people with software skills, hardware skills, and customer service skills on a team and go to seize that opportunity. And it was also driven by their desire to groom people for higher level responsibility, upward mobility. And the third driver was their emphasis on valuing diversity. So in fact, one of the results chart that you'll show later is actually from the IBM program, where we measured the skill gain of the participants in the program. And so over the years, and working with major clients like that, I really have refined my definition of mentoring, because it's used in so many different ways. It's used very casually, and I think misused, when people often are really calling a mentor what is actually a role model, someone that they look up to, but there's no really agreed relationship. So my definition of mentoring is, as a process, it's a deliberate pairing of a more skilled or experienced person with a lesser skilled or experienced person. And the agreed upon goal is that those skills and experiences will be transferred. And often that transfer is both ways. For example, in one of the insurance companies that we worked with, the mentor was actually a new hire engineer with advanced IT skills who could help longer service people learn the computer modeling that was necessary to adjust claims, while the protege in that relationship was a longer service, older person and higher level, actually. So a term of reverse mentoring is thrown around by a lot of people today. And I say that up, down, or sideways, it doesn't make any difference if there's a deliberate pairing, matching, based on the presence of skills or experiences in one person and the absence and desire to develop those skills in another person. And then, as I said, a lot of mentoring relationships take place informally and haphazardly. Our research showed that in any sizable organization, only about 3% of people are fortunate enough to find a mentor on their own. And that means that the vast majority of people in organizations are left out of this potentially valuable development experience. So we chose the term facilitated to describe the process that we have designed. We didn't want to call it structured or formal because that starts to sound bureaucratic to some people, and they resist having, too much formality to it. So we use the term facilitated, meaning that there is some team or person who facilitates the matching to make sure that it's done on the basis of skills and experience that's desired, and that makes for an effective match that increases the likelihood that it will be successful. And then facilitation guides the behavior change for those people involved, and facilitating the process puts in place an evaluation step that shows results for the organization, because every organization exists to get some kind of result. And if there isn't an identified outcome or ideal state, as our late friend Roger Kaufman would have said, there's no reason for the organization to exist. So that's why we chose the term facilitator, to make sure that you could show the value add of the process. And, as you mentioned, many organizations fragment by having coaching, by having mentoring, by having learning and development all separate, when they really should take a systems orientation to that and integrate the strategies so that they are applied in appropriate ways to the benefit of the employees and participants, and maximize the cost effectiveness of the resources that are applied. Because when they're all standalone programs, then there's a waste of resources, which are scarce in most organizations.
Yeah. So in your view, mentoring should be an integral part of the entire capability management and capability development of an organization. It's an unalienable part.
Yes,
it's not something nice to have. It's something must have.
Yes, and it is one strategy, just as taking an online course is one strategy for learning, or going to a workshop when that's available is one strategy for helping people to learn. While mentoring, a mentoring relationship adds the advantage of passing on the tacit knowledge that's often left out of formal training or formal learning and development processes, and putting into context the skills that are learned. So that's where mentoring becomes more cost effective, because it's targeted and focused on specific skill development. And ideally, a mentoring relationship would end when those skills and experiences have been gained. And as you did, the protege could then seek out, with the facilitator's help, another mentor who had a different skill set that the protege wanted to gain. You know, for example, an IT person might have a mentor who had high-level skills technically, and when the protege had learned those and then says, oh, well, now that I have these skills, I'd really like to go into marketing. And so a second mentor might be recruited who had marketing skills, and there would be a relationship agreed on there, and so on through, you know, one's career life. We could always be engaged in a mentoring relationship as long as we recognized or measured skills or experiences that we lacked and that we wanted to develop. And when we look at the operating concept of facilitated mentoring, then you will see how those relationships can develop, and how the mentoring component is just one strategy, one resource that a well-managed organization would provide for its employees.
How does it, how mentoring is different? I can see that how it works, and it really facilitate the transfer of results, and it also rotates. I mean, you rotate to another mentor for a different set of skills and experiences. I noticed that you also mentioned not only skills but experiences, which is, I will come back later to that. But then how is mentoring? My question is, how is mentoring different from coaching or even the modern apprenticeship then?
Well, actually, I think mentoring grew out of the ancient apprenticeship process that was present in crafts and arts from time began. You know, a blacksmith, for example, often took on an apprentice and trained that person in the skill of blacksmithing. And I used to tell the story that then when the mentor, in that case, the master of that craft and blacksmithing, passed on, the apprentice often took over the craft and became a master. And in the arts, actually, where we got the term masterpiece as a work of art, is when the apprentice produced an example of artwork, and it was judged by other master artists and was deemed to be of the quality that could be designated a masterpiece. And for example, in Ireland, Waterford Crystal still uses that process for people coming into the art of glass cutting. And so each apprentice, when they're ready to take on the master role, they produce a bowl that has all of the cuts that Waterford uses in their glass making. And that if that bowl has the quality of cuts on it, then the apprentice is designated as a master glass cutter. So down through the ages, we developed in other industries apprentices. And for example, we partnered with General Motors and on a project for school to work to when the growth, of course, in jobs in the US was in the service industries, and General Motors was having trouble in their dealerships getting service technicians. And Jack Smith had worked with Volkswagen in Germany, where the apprentice process was used strongly to develop new people in that industry. And he decided that they would offer in GM a program to their dealers where they would partner with the schools, high schools or vocational technical schools, and bring students in the junior and senior, the 11th and 12th grades in those schools, to pair them with a mentor in a dealership who was a master service technician. And we designed the mentoring process for that and had 7 schools in 4 states that we worked with in the trial program. And it's still being used in some dealerships in the US today, because by having certified in the automotive trades, a young person then could go anywhere in the nation and get a job in a dealership because they had evidence with their passport to success of their skills that they had learned with a master service technician. And it spread also to civil air, to hospitality and cosmetology among the vocational technical schools. So you might call, in fact, in some of the organizations we worked with, we couldn't use the term mentor because they had tried a mentoring program and it had failed. And so it had a bad connotation to the term. And then with one of the major sports manufacturers, obviously they wanted to use the term coach. So what I have come to define the similarities and differences of mentor and coach is that mentor is a role. And if you're a student of Greek mythology, you know that mentor was a person.
Right.
And so mentor is a noun, and yet it's used as a verb so often that it confuses. But what a good mentor does is teach, model, coach, and listen, and pass on the tacit knowledge and the context, while a coach is both a skill and a role, and the coach is most often concerned with a specific technical or professional skill. So like a basketball coach is coaching a player to do free throws or defensive tactics, and doesn't take on the role of mentor in terms of career guidance or solving or helping to listen to personal problems and that kind of thing. So the mentor role includes requiring the skill of coaching and practicing that skill, and a lot more than just the coach would do. Does that clarify it for you?
Yeah. And how about apprenticeship?
Well, I think you could use the term apprentice or protege or intern or whatever was appropriate in the organization, because you know, organizations develop their own terminologies that communicate effectively. So any of those terms might be used to describe the learner in that relationship. So if it was a mentoring relationship, I would use the term protege, but that's not acceptable in a lot of organizations because they think it's foreign language, French. And
Yes, French.
so mentee is often,
Mentee. Yeah.
well, mentee is not even a word, but it has become commonly used to describe the learner role in that relationship. But you don't use the term coachee when you're talking about a coaching relationship. And
No.
in fact, with our work with Nike, the term that they chose for mentor was coach, and the term that they chose for the protege was future all-star. So
That's nice. It's a Nike, so all-star.
so again,
NBA.
yeah, and every organization has to choose terms that are acceptable and easily understood and that fit their culture, because the culture, in some countries, when we've translated our model, for example, in Spanish speaking countries, we've had a great deal of difficulty finding an appropriate term for mentor because most of the Spanish terms sound like godfather or something that's not an attractive term. So when we've worked in Argentina and Chile and Spain and Mexico, those organizations have just used the term mentor because it's now commonly acceptable practically worldwide. And then they choose whatever term for the learner in that relationship that fits. It might be apprentice, it might be intern, it might just be participant, it might be partner. In some organizations, they've used the term partner rather than imply a level of superiority of one person over the other.
I like that future all-star from Nike. It's so unique.
Yes. Well, Nike was unique at one time.
I've learned that the word mentor is from the ancient Greek mythology, one of the Greek masterpieces, Homer. And that's a person, as you said. And ever since, because of that story, and in English, it's a borrowed, I mean, it kind of merged into English and become the way that we're now using it in the business world. So how is mentoring different? Well, first of all, is mentoring can be done to like many students or participants or mentees, like, or even is that only one-on-one basis, or one mentor to like 3, 4, 5 multiple mentees, and that is that workable, or what is the standard format, or what is the norm?
In my opinion, the ideal situation is one-to-one and one relationship at a time. And then when the goals and objectives for that have been met, then that relationship would conclude and either could go on to a new relationship. However, there are people who have the capacity. For example, when we designed the program for FedEx, Federal Express, where we did an 8-year longitudinal study of the success of it, there was one manager who had to believe the priority for my job is to develop people. And so in addition to his line management responsibility, he took on the role of mentor to a number of proteges. And a really self-responsible protege might engage with more than one mentor at a time. And the number of relationships would be limited only by the drive strength and the energy and the time that someone was willing to put into their own development. So I might say the ideal is one-to-one and one at a time, and yet there are successful examples of people who have had multiple mentors at one time and mentors who have had multiple partner relationships at one time. So we discourage people from taking on more than they can handle, because if they burn out on it, they'll start to neglect the relationship or their job or both.
Right. So how, now I know what mentoring is, and how is it related to the learning and development system? You know, normally at a company, you know, they have their training system. So is that work in parallel to the learning development system, the formal and informal trainings, and also all those online learnings, or is that in parallel, or is it part of it?
Well, I think if you look at my graphic of the operating concept of facilitated mentoring, I can explain that where the mentoring strategy fits. And so, as I mentioned earlier, it's our belief that every organization exists to produce some type of result. And so in every successful organization, you will find that to focus on those results, they create a vision for the organization. They do a stakeholder analysis so that they set a mission for the organization. They set goals for the organization and identify needs and opportunities. And then in a well-managed organization, they would put in place the positions that would be required to achieve those goals and fulfill the mission. So in that graphic, you'll see a figure at the center of it. So that's every position in an organization that contributes to the results of the organization. And if the position doesn't contribute any results, the position should go away. For example, when organizations converted from manual accounting systems to electronic or data processing or IT, the manual accounting positions should have gone away. Although in some organizations there was redundancy and they kept those in place because some accountants didn't trust computers for a long time. But that's just one example. So if you look at the figure in the center and say that's a position in the organization that contributes to the results. And so a well-managed organization would surround the people in those positions by the resources that they need to produce those results. And those resources would be salary and equipment and healthcare and those kinds of things that you see on the left, and learning and development opportunities, whether that be an e-learning or online or a formal classroom or whatever strategy and resource that was cost effective to develop that. So the learning and development function is a resource to a performer in a position that's there to produce results. And then the mentoring strategy is a mentor is just another resource to that person. And that mentoring relationship is driven by a development plan, and for the protege or that performer person. And that development plan may include taking an in-person workshop, taking an e-learning course, or having a coaching session with the mentor. And then, of course, in most organizations, In the upper left of the graphic is the supervisor or manager or team leader. And again, ideally, that person is a resource to the performer and lays out clear job responsibilities, gives feedback and appraisals and performance reviews to enable that performer to produce the results that are desired. And then in a facilitated mentoring process, I've labeled that the coordination team or facilitation team. And that role is to communicate with managers and supervisors on what's needed in terms of learning and development for their employees, and to help recruit mentors. And then the facilitation team might also identify gaps in the learning and development resources, especially if there's a major change in technology, for example, then they would suggest that some new IT people be identified or resources and brought in to make them available to people to learn the new skills that are required. So this is a systems and systematic way to position the mentoring relationship as a strategy to support high-level performance.
What is EDAP in the middle?
An electronic development action plan.
Oh, got it.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for illustrating us the mentor model, the facilitated mentor model and process. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. And the triangle.
People often think of it as a linear process, and it isn't. It's a dynamic and fluid process that is integrated with the other learning and development and performance improvement strategies that the organization can avail themselves of. The advantages, as I've mentioned before, are it's more cost effective than formal training, because if you think of that workshop icon that's there, 85% of the content of that is wasted in our research for most people, because it's a skill that they already have, or it's a skill that they don't need. And yet they sit through a course wasting 85% of their time, whereas with a mentor, 100% of the interaction is focused on a targeted objective for learning and development, ideally.
Right. It's more focused. The reason I'm asking the relation with the learning development system is because in China, and because of so many companies are developing and fast growing, so they have like the formal and informal training is a system itself. It's a mechanism itself, with a lot of IT systems and e-learning and micro-learning and action learning, all of that. So in China, in mentoring is here. So how does it work? Because when you come into numbers, there's a massive number of participants or mentees waiting there, and we're short of mentors, but we got a lot of mentees there. So I'm thinking maybe the real scenario in China's application is maybe for higher skilled jobs, the jobs that require higher skills or more specific skills, or with some like executive development, like for managers go to senior levels, and senior level go to directors and go to executives. So maybe in that field, and then they can, instead of being applied on a massive scale.
Well, rather than keep it separate or identifying it by level, what an organization might think about is blending it, so that, for example, sending a person, let's say, out of an engineering school, sending that person to an IT course, even an e-learning online, may be a waste of time because they already have those skills. So it might be better to just pair that person with a master performer as a mentor to put into context for the job which of those IT skills are necessary and most relevant to that job. So it would really shorten the learning time for the person, because if you assess or identify the presence of the skills already and skip ahead, if you will, to what the mentor could say, okay, well, in this specific job, especially if they specialize on a type of, let's say, hardware or software skills, you'll find a need for these skills that you already have. And what we see is you have a gap in these one or two skills. So I can coach you on those, or we can identify a segment of an e-learning course that you could really target and focus to fill that gap. So if it's worked in an integrated way, a blended way, then it would be more efficient and more cost effective than keeping them separate. It might be interesting for one of your clients to look at and assess the skills of people in the formal mentoring process and in the other learning and development courses, and see, what these people already have and how they're how relevant the course is to their needs. Like we did with management training, where the example I gave was that in those management training courses, 85%, only 15% of the content was relevant to everybody in the course. And there are tools to do those assessments.
I mean, thank you so much. You really kind of set up the, setting up another definition, maybe the real definition of mentoring for a lot of companies, because to my knowledge, because I've gone through some companies and my clients, and most of the word mentoring in Chinese is being used really, as you said, as a kind of a role model, giving out directions and career development, where you or life, guidance, like an old master, like the movie Kung Fu Panda, that master, with a stick walking, and then he come to like a very shrewd person, an old person with a lot of wit, and then he can give out a lot of guidance and directions to the youngsters, and they're eager to grow. And when they encounter in a challenging situation, they come to the master for guidance. So most of it is more like that. So, but by your definition and also your facilitated mentoring program process, to me, it is not only an integral part of the capability management, the capability development effort of an organization. It can also be complementary to a formal learning and development system or mechanism, and they can be used in conjunction. They can be used, in your word, in blended way. So in other words, that mentoring can be a very effective toolbox, one of the major tools that in my toolbox, and for the organization say, oh, maybe we can use mentoring that fits our organization a lot, and then we can use mentoring program, and then instead of conducting massive formal trainings, because some of the formal trainings, when they design, develop it, and train it, and then you have to pray that they will transfer those skills from the classroom to the workplace. You have to go really keep your fingers crossed. But as mentoring program is more effective because it's a one-on-one under most under most circumstances, it's one-on-one. So it's more focused on the specific set of skills and knowledge, and as you said, experiences, and which is very important because learning and development programs, we don't teach experiences. Because experiences is really, you have to, do the shadowing. When I was at IBM, my last year, I was doing shadowing. I was in the group of, it's called the G100. G100 is really a mentoring program, but that's kind of a formal mentoring program for Greater China, for higher potential senior leaders to go to the executive level. And at that time, I realized it is really a mentoring program, but in a different name, different format at IBM. And it was designed to develop specific set of skills. So my question to you is, how do we measure its value? It is so effective.
I will give you several examples. And first, I want to say things like job shadowing. Again, a person like you might have observed some senior managers doing something totally inappropriate. For example, we had a situation with a bank where the banker was doing something illegal. And so a potential protege job shadowing that person would have learned something that could get them in trouble. So I'd like to describe a little bit of the difference between what you described as most mentoring processes that you've observed in China now, where they're rather informal, and sometimes the protege or mentee seeks out his or her own mentor. Sometimes the mentor reaches out and brings someone along. So when we were asked the question, well, how does your facilitated process differ, or why facilitate it rather than just let it happen, quote unquote, naturally, we identified some key success factors to spending time and resources on mentoring. And in the left column on that, we identified that for it to be successful, a mentoring process has to be linked to the business goals. And it has to have internal ownership of the process. So top down, managers must believe that it adds value and that there's a reason to commit budget and resources to it. And it has to be aimed at developing skills and behaviors of employees, of performers, and there has to be a comprehensive facilitation of it. In other words, it has to be deliberately managed rather than just haphazardly occurring. And finally, the results have to be measured. In the other two columns of that chart, your participants will see how informal mentoring lacks those critical success factors, and how facilitated mentoring makes sure that those critical success factors are met. And the last one, the measurement of results. You'll often hear, as I'm sure you have in ISPI, is what we measure is what we get. And if we're paying attention to a particular metric, then that's what people are going to be focused on. So I can show you in some charts the types of indicators that might be put in place or selected to measure the results of a mentoring process. And these will vary organization by organization. But you might, for example, track the success of recruitment. how many acceptances per job offer is the organization getting? You might measure retention. Are the people that you want to stay with you, are they staying? Or are you losing people because they see a more attractive salary or opportunity somewhere else? You might measure the costs of training and development. That's very difficult because, you know, there's hidden costs of the space and maintenance and for formal training and those kinds of things. And so just measuring the number of participants in particular courses is not a complete measure of the cost of training and development. You can measure the skills of participants, both job-specific skills, and I have an example of that, and the more generic and skills such as emotional intelligence. And you might measure how flexible is your workforce? Can someone function in more than one type of job? And then most organizations have some measures of productivity and quality and safety. And you could measure the motivation of participants. So those are some of the indicators that you could offer to an organization and say, which of these are going to be important for you to track to know that the learning and development interventions you're choosing do add value. So one example that I chose to show you is from assemblers of disk drives in a high-tech company, where prior to putting the mentoring process in place, they were getting a very high reject rate of their products. And once we put the one-to-one mentoring process in place, the productivity improved and the reject rate, the quality rate went down. To state it more positively, the acceptance rate went way up. And in addition to that, there was unexpected consequence of the assemblers wore their safety gear more consistently because it was modeled for them. And so their on-the-job accidents went down. And then in the next chart, you'll see a measure of training cost savings, where an organization was spending 3 weeks in formal training for new hires. And you can see what the cost of that was. And once we put the mentoring process in place and identified that a lot of the new hires already had the skills that they were being exposed to in the formal training, the training dropped from 3 weeks to a day and a half, and the cost savings was almost $700,000 in the first year. So that's another example of how you can measure the impact of mentoring. The next chart is from a community-based mentoring process in a country that had high unemployment and lack of competition globally for their products and services. And we identified successful businesses as mentors for emerging entrepreneurs. And the mentors helped their new business partners identify their business needs and then provided them coaching. And the gross revenue of the new entrepreneurs increased by 36%, their profit by 38%, and their employment by 29%. And the vast majority of them were satisfied or highly satisfied with the mentoring partnership. So that's a different type of metric, a different type of indicator, and a different type of program, and that it wasn't within an organization, it was across a community of businesses. Now, the next examples are from the company that you and I talked about earlier. And the first one is the generic skills measured on an instrument that we call Skills for Career and Life Effectiveness, scale. And so you can see the pre-post bars there of the significant skill gain. And this was of mentors in a mentoring relationship over a 9-month period of time. And the adjacent chart to that is the job-specific skills of the proteges in those relationships measured on a 5-point Likert scale, pre and post, again at a 9-month interval. So you can see significant skill gain in almost all of the identified job-specific skills. So those are 2 examples of results measurements, one on generic skills, emotional intelligence skills, and the other one on job-specific. And then the next chart is actually one that I related to earlier, where the mentors were called coaches. And this is from a division of sales. So you can see the pre-post measurement there and the ratings of the future all-stars by their coaches on skills such as their presentation skills, their ability to select the right assortment of merchandise, their computer skills, their use of time, their accounting skills and customer service skills, and then creating sales scenarios. So those are all indicators that were chosen by the coaches to track for their future all-star partners on a pre-post basis. And by the way, the guy who did these did the most sophisticated evaluations that we have ever seen, t-test and chi-square distributions and all of these statistical things that make some people's eyes kind of glaze over. So those 6 examples show you measuring quality and productivity and costs and the actual impact on a business and their revenue and profit, and then the skills of participants, generic and job specific. So, and we have lots of other examples. I just chose these 6 different to show the types of things that could be measured to identify impact and results, and then some actual examples of what was done in those organizations.
Great, thank you. I want to ask you 3 follow-up questions on the mentoring, and then we're gonna move into the latter part of the interview. First of all, is mentoring program, can the skills or experiences acquired by the protege sustained? Is that sustainable, or is this consistent performance on the job thereafter?
Well, I think that depends on it depends on the work environment. If the protege gains a skill through coaching with a mentor and goes back to his or her boss and says, I can now apply this skill to my job. And if that manager or supervisor says, great, at our next progress review, let's talk about how you've applied the skill to the job. And if that manager or supervisor provides motivating feedback and reinforcement, yes, it will be applied to the job and sustained and continued. In contrast, if that performer went to a formal training course and it was irrelevant to the job, let's say the person is in IT and went to a marketing course that they just happened to have a space for, and the manager said, why don't you go to this course? and then the performer comes back to the job and never has an opportunity to practice those skills or to apply them, no, they wouldn't be sustained, because any behavior or performance that is not practiced and reinforced becomes extinct. So it's the use it or lose it concept that, so the variable of that impacts the sustainability of it is what takes place in the work environment.
What about the length of a facilitated mentoring program? How long does it last? Like 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, or 3 months?
What we say is the mentoring pair should let learning be the constant and time be the variable. And again, it depends. If they can only meet once a month for an hour, and they're working, let's say, on a generic management or leadership skill, it may take months or a year. But if they could meet once a week and the mentor could provide really efficient coaching and feedback, then that skill might be gained, the experience might be transferred in 2, 3, 4 months, and then that relationship could conclude. So going back, it depends on what type of skill or experience is the focus of the development, the amount of time they can spend together, and over what period of time, and the frequency of their interaction.
So it is really job specific or goal. It depends on the goal setting.
Yes.
I mean, what the program goals are. And last question on mentoring. You also said it transfers experiences, which is almost very scarce in the formal learning and development program. So tell us because experiences most of the times are individual based. How do I transfer my experiences to another person on a set of skills?
Well, let's take sales as an example.
Right.
I can take an e-learning course that gives me the product knowledge, the specifications of the product and its quality tests and all of that. So I could do an e-learning on the product. I could even probably do an e-learning that would show me the features of that product and the benefits to the customer. What I don't get is, how do I communicate those to a customer? Because every customer is going to be different. So a mentor could say, I'll ride along with you to your next sales call. And on the way, I'll tell you what I know about that customer and his or her business. And I have approached them in this way. Maybe it's a different culture where in that customer's environment, you sit down and have a cup of tea before you start talking about the product. Or conversely, it might be a customer who says, don't waste my time with, the familiarities. Let's cut to the chase and tell me how your product will benefit me. And so an experienced mentor could share that experience and remove a potential obstacle for the new salesperson. And then as they complete the sales call, the mentor can provide immediate positive reinforcement for how well that worked for the new salesperson. whereas most sales managers do not take the time to pass on their experience because they may be supervising 20 different salespeople. And I think one of the things that we're learning with the remoteness that a lot of us are experiencing now with COVID-19 is that people's affiliation needs aren't being met. And I've heard examples of supervisors saying, I'm reaching out by email or telephone to each of my people once a week to see, are they well? Are they staying safe? And do they need anything in order to do their job? Whereas when we were in the same office building, I maybe did that once a month or once every 2 or 3 months. So the affiliation needs can be met even under, the dire circumstances that we're experiencing right now. So that's how any boss or manager, and certainly a mentor who has taken the responsibility to pass on experience, can provide that tacit knowledge that's often overlooked in formal learning and development strategies.
Great. I also wanna mention, thank you so much for all the follow-up questions. These are very important because I'm also thinking, while you're sharing with me and you're talking, I'm also thinking, how do we use it in China? How do we implement it in China? What's the Chinese situations? Because they're fast-growing companies, and it's a little bit, it's a very good program. This book is written by you, the Beyond the Myth and Magic of Mentoring. And which year was it published?
That is the second edition, and it was published in 2001.
Right, about 20 years, almost 19 years ago. So does it have a newer version right now?
Actually, the strategies and guidelines in that book are timeless. I've gone back and looked at it, as has Wiley. And other than, providing additional examples, I couldn't think of a way to really improve on it. The first edition was 10 years before that. And so I did do the second edition because we had 10 more years of experience with clients. And so I had more specific examples and case studies that I could include in that book and results. So
I was
writing is hard work for me.
This is I do agree. It is timeless. A lot of solid work, solid research, and solid development work are really timeless. When I interviewed with Dr. Karen Watkins, and she's the HRD professor from University of Georgia, and she said a lot of works, and a lot of them actually on the Training Master Series, they say a lot of works are timeless. A lot of work in the learning development performance improvement work did in the 50s, even 50s, 60s, mostly 70s, 80s are very solid work, and they're still working today, even though we have cell phones today and we're in the information age. We are still relying on those theories, models, processes, tools, definitions, concepts, standards. We're still relying on those. For instance, the 10 standards that you have been practicing along for many years and became the standards, like the 10 standards in the 90s and in 95, I believe. And of course, our Roger Addison and with others and develop the RSVP and so on and so forth. I'm just drawing one example because you mentioned earlier. And I really going through your book, and thank you for this edition, because this is a souvenir from Mr. Hui Ding, my partner, my business partner, of our trip to Warsaw. If you remember, we met in Warsaw again So Roger
Yes.
Kaufman was there, and Roger and Jan was there, and you were there, and Klaus and Roger Addison, and John Lazar and everybody. So Karol Panza, and so this was a souvenir from Warsaw, Poland. So, and I do have your autograph. It's so precious today nowadays. And thank you for all the hard work. It is really going through your book gave me a new set of outlook to what mentoring should be instead of what it is today. So I do see a big gap between what companies are using it now. It can be in China, can be a very good system, a mechanism working in collaboration with our learning and development systems. So anyway, thank you so much. And we're moving into some of the closing questions, unless you, Margo, you have other comments on the. So my next question is, how do you predict the pandemic will impact our field of mentoring? Because right now we're staying home, you mentioned.
Well, I actually like the example I gave of the supervisor who's reaching out more frequently to his direct reports. So I think that's a positive outcome from it. I think that we'll have to seek more cost-effective and efficient ways and resources for learning and development, because we're realizing that we have to learn to function in different environments. So I think the interaction skills, the communication skills are being identified as more critical. The emotional intelligence skills. Do we have empathy for people who are working from home with children and pets and, you know, all of the distractions and still producing quality work? Do we have that ability to work closely with someone in affiliation, even when geographically and physically we're remote from them? So one of the impacts I see is that we'll develop more of the emotional intelligence skills and apply them more consistently where they might have been neglected when we thought that they'll just magically happen in an office building where you see people in the hallway every day. So that's, you know, one of the positive impacts I see. And I was even thinking, you know, as you were kindly mentioning the book, is our dependence on technology has certainly been heightened with this situation. And the example I gave of the mentor with the salesperson, I mean, now with the technology we have, that ride along could have been done by Zoom rather than in actual physical contact. And
like
the interaction with the customer. Yes, the interaction with the customer might have been done by Skype or Zoom. And so I think when we have to communicate digitally, electronically, that we'll become more efficient. I think we'll also become more aware of the need to be culturally sensitive and think, because, you know, I've not worked directly in China. I worked on a wonderful project with Procter & Gamble and Bechtel to develop the performance system for an industrial chemical plant that was built in Jiangmen. And so we brought the Chinese engineers to California as we handed off the learning and performance process to them. And because I have worked directly in 26 countries, I've learned long ago to be really culturally sensitive, to try to enunciate clearly when I speak, to avoid slang and jargon, and especially to avoid jokes or humor that might be inappropriate for the audience. So I think that many of our human interactions, when they have to take place this way, will be more efficient. They'll be more culturally sensitive and hopefully more effective when we know that we have to make it matter in this format rather than, approaching someone in a hallway and an offhanding on and not even aware that we might have offended that person. So I'm hoping my incurable Pollyanna says, let's make this work and have some positive results from it.
Thank you. Thank you. And can you tell us, I want to add another question because you have the Margo's maxioms. Can you, the pushback, live with your values, get close. If it is to be, it is up to he. Be good. Oh, to me, I'm sorry, it's up to me. Well, to meet your luck. So all these 6 points are all of your kind of experiences and summaries of your experiences, your mottos.
As you might expect, considering my lengthy experience and career and years, I'm often asked about the genesis of my own work ethic and my sense of equity and fairness and how I've managed to overcome a number of obstacles and still be what is considered fairly successful. And so years ago, in fact, if you listen to my 1984 keynote speech at ISPI, you'll see where I actually wrote these down, and I think that was the first time I ever did. I call them Margo's maxims, so they have become kind of the tenets of how I believe and how I behave in my interaction with others. And so the first one is when we encounter what looks like an obstacle or someone trying to prevent us from doing what we believe is right and fair. And I think we need to push back at least once. For example, if we offer a solution to a client's problem and they say, oh, we don't have time for that. If we just accept that and go away, we haven't helped the client. So I think we need to be prepared with facts, of course, and data, and push back and say, I know that you don't believe this right now, but let's try it in a small sample or pilot. And if it works, then you'll be convinced. So that's pushback at least once. The second one is live within your values. Almost all interpersonal conflict is when our values are conflicted. And that's when we have to learn to live and work within our value system. And an example for me was I had to leave the big organization that I was working with when I really felt that my values were conflicted, because I was working really hard for something that I hoped would never happen, and that was war. And so I had to leave that organization because my values were conflicted. And similarly, I have turned down potentially lucrative consulting contracts with organizations where I couldn't accept their values. An example being a tobacco company. I could not work for a tobacco company.
Yep.
And the third one is get close. And I think that leaders and managers who maintain distance from themselves are not leaders or managers. They are crusaders, and So they fail to recognize or have empathy with people with whom they work. And I think we have to have the ability to be a little vulnerable and to work in close proximity with people, uh, developing our skills of empathy and interpersonal comfort in order to be more effective. And the next one, if it is to be, it's up to me. I hear people saying all the time, well, they should do something. Well, if we want to see change, we have to be the change we want to see. And if I'm unhappy with some situation in the environment, for example, I strongly support recycling. And I believe that if we're going to protect Mother Earth, and I think we have to take steps to do that. And when I came here to Missouri, I found out they didn't separate their trash and everything. And I've pushed back against that until the company that picks up my trash, I'm going to separate it because I don't expect you to take it all in one big bin and then somebody else has to separate it. So if it is to be that we have a cleaner world to live in, a part of the responsibility for that is up to me. And the next one, be good, is I think some people resist doing things because they have a desire to be perfect. And their ego is so big that they won't take risks because they don't want to fail. So I say, some jobs are worth doing perfectly and some are not. So learn to be good and to recognize the difference in, what level is required. And I tell a story about one of the professional golfers who said that somebody said to him once, you're a really lucky golfer because you win a lot of tournaments. You're really lucky. And he said, yes, and the more I practice, the luckier I get. And so I think that we have to be willing to walk to meet our luck. We have to practice, we have to prepare, and we have to be looking for the opportunities where we can take advantage of whatever serendipitously or luckily falls our way. So that's how I try to live. And I'm often chastised for giving away so much of what I have developed. And I say, I operate from a position of abundance. I think there's enough for all of us. And so I'm very willing to share. And so I really relate to being generous and having gratitude. And I think maybe our current situation with the pandemic is also heightening the need for generosity of spirit and gratitude for what we have.
Thank you. Those six maxims are really something that good advice. I will also, I want to ask this question format. Do you have any advice to the younger L&D practitioners in China and other developing countries?
Well, I've been asked this question a lot recently because I think a lot of young graduates are thinking that they'll go into a consulting business right away. And my advice is to go with an organization that's big enough that you have an opportunity to learn a variety of skills, the emotional intelligence skills of working with other people, as well as functional skills, technical skills, professional skills. And where you have an opportunity to move into positions of leadership and supervision so that you can hone those skills before tackling, launching a business that would be doomed to fail because you don't know the business language. You haven't had the experience of producing results that are measurable. And so that's some advice I gave someone recently who asked me for an interview. It used to be that people would call me and say, "Can I take you to lunch and pick your brain about how to start a business?" Well, I don't get offers to be taken to lunch much anymore, but I still get requests for picking my brain about how to start a business. So even with the remote situation, that question gets asked. And that's how I answer it is, really walk to meet your luck. Prepare yourself with essential skills and, not just the technical skills that might be required or professional skills that might be required in a certain career, but also those interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence skills so that you learn to get close to people and work effectively people in your life's work, because that's where the richer, most rewarding results will be experienced.
Thank you. Thank you so much on behalf of all the viewers in front of our screen. That thank you for the good advice, because yes, I've heard that a lot too. When you just graduated from college, fresh graduate, and you want to move into consulting business, and well, that requires a lot of life experiences as well, instead of just the professional skills. So you have to have some accumulation of both. And last question, Margo, I know it's I don't want to hold you up too long, but if you had a chance to do it all over again, what have you done differently?
Well, when I looked at that question, it was really tough for me. I certainly wouldn't have changed the parents I was born to, because they gave me a strong work ethic, work hard, be honest, and authentic, and maintain integrity. So I wouldn't have changed that. Right. I might have delayed starting my family a bit, but then I wouldn't have had the wonderful son that I have. Or I don't know. We can't change those things. I don't think I would have changed my work experience. I certainly would have, had I known that such a resource was available. I would have found a mentor sooner, because growing up on a farm, I didn't know what careers were available. I saw teacher and farmer and grocery store owner. I didn't even see a dentist until I was like 17 years old. So having someone help me become aware of different careers and different opportunities would have been an advantage. Right. However, I learned so much in my work with the Air Force, a lot of different jobs, clerical, and then budget, and then with the telephone company, and launching my own business. Could have been scary. I'm sure it was, because in the mid 70s, it was neither easy or popular for a woman to start a business. And I never had to seek external funding. I was able to do it with my own hard work and resources, and I wouldn't change that. I wouldn't change any of the wonderful friendships and professional relationships that I've developed over the years. I have learned to discard those that are not growthful and supportive for me. Like I said, I don't see a lot of things I would have changed. I'm really done.
Thank you so much, Margo, for spending nearly 2 hours with us and telling us, teaching us about mentoring, sharing your not only your professional experience, professional knowledge, but also your life experiences with us, and that's very valuable. And that's the purpose of this training master series. And to be honest with you, you're the 28th people that on our show, and each one of the guests is a gold mine, as I described. It's a gold mine, and there's so much that we are eager to learn. I mean, even younger, like younger professionals from in their 20s, 30s, even the 40s. There's a lot of, I mean, even 50s, we're still babies, but there's so much to learn, to exchange, and to gain some inspirations from each other. And thanks to the technology, even during the pandemic, I really appreciate your taking time, so much time with us. And please stay safe and stay well. And we'll get back to you soon. A lot of requests. Thank you.
谢谢。
谢谢. Thank you. Thank you. That's my interview with Margo Murray. How do you feel? I really learned a lot again. During our interview, I asked her a lot of questions about the mentoring program and how does it work? How does it collaborate or complement with the learning and development system of an organization? I indeed learned a lot again. And she gave us a lot of business cases and successful examples that she have done through her past of nearly 5 decades of career. Just to a little bit more background, Margo used to be the president of ISPI between 1986 to 1987, nearly 34 years ago. So she's a very senior. Again, thank you, Margo, for your decades of contribution to our performance improvement field. We wish you well. We hope to hearing from you more and soon, and to learn more from you. Thank you again. Next week, we are going to have another opportunity again to have another very important figure in the field of instructional design to be on our TMS show. His name is Dr. Greg Sales. Yes, Dr. Greg Sales. He used to be the chair of the Department of Instructional Design Technology at the University of Minnesota. And she has been chair for over many, many years. And also, he is a good old friend of mine. And I used to intern at his e-learning company for a few months. During our interview next week, we're going to ask him a lot of questions around ISD and e-learning. Yes, he is an expert on ISD, instructional system design, and e-learning. We're going to ask him about what his definition of ISD, instructional system design, and what is the relations between ISD and performance results. And also around e-learning, what are the e-learning development cycle? Because e-learning is so popular in China now, especially we're doing a lot of mini courses. Are those really courses? Are those taught really knowledge? So we're going to explore those topics with Dr. Sales. So until next week, please stay tuned, stay safe. Thank you, and good night.